Hello, friends and families. Welcome to the Educa DPS podcast. My name is Javier Ibarra, Senior Manager of Media and Public Relations for Denver Public Schools. Today is a very special Educa because I not only have one guest, but I have two. I want to introduce Levi Erithson, Program Manager of the LGBTQ plus initiatives and culture for DPS. As you can imagine, he has a very long business card. And we're very lucky to have a very own student from East High School. We have Eric Ramirez Naranjo. How are you guys doing today?
Good. Yeah, doing well.
That's awesome. I'm glad to have you on the podcast, and I know it's going to be a great topic today. Levi is here to share with us all and our listeners about this great documentary that he has produced and directed, and also to talk about the LGBTQ plus supports available in our school district. Eric is going to talk to us about his student experience, which is going to be very interesting, and I'm looking forward to diving into that. I want to start off with a little background, if you will. I recently, and by coincidence, had a chance to read an article that said it's important for schools to be welcoming places for all LGBTQ plus students. And here's a quote that I wanted to pull from that is, public schools often lead the way for the broader society in modeling inclusiveness and pluralism. It is important that staff, teachers, and educators in general can ensure LGBTQ plus students feel safe, welcome, and included in their classrooms. And as a reminder, a part of our strategic roadmap designed by our proud superintendent, Dr. Alex Marrero, includes the student experience. And so I'm happy to announce that today on this podcast, we will be featuring that. Now, I have a little icebreaker to get the folks, give them a little bit of your background. So can you tell me a little bit about yourself and what you enjoy most about the work that you do in our school district?
Sure. So a little bit about myself. I'm Levi. I am a transmasculine, genderqueer person. I live here in West Denver. I have an awesome 3-year-old, and I live with him and my wife here in the city. I've been working with LGBTQ plus youth for about 16 years in a variety of different settings. I worked at a nonprofit. I was a high school art teacher here in DPS before taking on this role. I love hot yoga. I'm a Taurus. I'm totally a Taurus. It was just my birthday.
Awesome.
I know, I'm very stubborn. It's okay. What do I enjoy most about the work that I do in the school district? That is a hard question to answer. I feel really lucky and blessed that I get to do this work every single day. And every single day I get to do something that I'm passionate about, that I care about. But I think what do I enjoy most? I think what I enjoy most is working directly with students. And so my job involves a lot of different pieces, but anytime I get to connect with students, hear about what's happening for them in our schools, hear about ways in which I can support, and then also doing things like planning events with students to increase student belonging and sense of joy. That's what I like to do the most.
And that's how you got to work with Eric.
Yeah, that's how I got to work with Eric. Yeah, working in the documentary. So when we started this documentary process, which we're not talking about now, we put out a call to schools, and we didn't know the students that we would end up with, but I'm really glad that Eric was one of them.
Thank you. Yeah. So sweet.
And Eric, tell our audience a little bit about yourself. Where do you go to school? What grade are you in?
Yeah, I'm a current senior at Denver East High School. I'm from the city of Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico, proud to represent. And I've been here at Denver my entire life, born and raised. And just, I love the ambiance of East Denver, the supportive community that the city has. I really love indulging in that and going to every Pride Fest every year in Denver. And I'm a really big hiker. I love to go hiking, whether that's in Boulder or just like any little getaway trip, anywhere you can hike. I mean, even if it's the hike up to like the first floor to the 4th floor, I love it.
We have stairs here, so
I'll make sure to go up and down.
I'll see you there at the bottom.
Yes. So let's start off this podcast. My first question for you is, what is the definition of the LGBTQ plus acronym?
So the LGBTQ plus acronym stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, plus. And so the plus can stand for a lot of different things. It can stand for allies. So sometimes you'll see an A at the end, and that can stand for allies. It also stands for other sexual identities or gender identities that may not be included in that acronym. So that can be anything from pansexual, asexual. I could go on and on, so I won't. It also includes like folks who are intersex, and I think really an important thing to mention too is that it also includes folks who identify as Two-Spirit, which is an indigenous gender identity, and that really is connected to the history of indigenous cultures.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for that. And I think it's important that we start off the podcast with that, because that's going to lay the groundwork for this whole podcast, because we're going to be using that acronym throughout.
Yeah.
My next question here is, why is it important to have open conversations about gender, family, and sexual diversity with our children?
Yeah. You know, I was thinking about this question when I was driving here this morning, and I was thinking about a different way I might ask it, which would be, why is it important to talk about different people, right? And so I think that sometimes kind of what we're hearing in the kind of national narrative is that we're speaking about gender and sexual diversity in a way that does not fit into other conversations, or you know, we don't ask these questions about like heterosexual people, right? Why should we talk about heterosexual people? That's a real question, right? I'm not trying to be facetious. So I think that when we talk about gender and sexual diversity, what we're really talking about is people who exist.
Right.
That's why it's important, right? It's important that people see themselves reflected in their worlds. It's important that people know that there are other people like them. And I think for us in the district, it's important that families know that we see them, right? We have LGBTQ plus students, we have LGBTQ plus staff, we have LGBTQ plus families in our district. So I think it's important for that reason, but I also think it's important because LGBTQ plus people have always existed and are a part of history and life. And so I think that, you know, we actually talk about heterosexual and cisgender people all the time, but we don't have to name it, right? We don't have to ask permission to talk about it. And there's nothing controversial about talking about people who exist. Do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, like,
am I doing?
it's perfect. I mean,
Okay.
I want to like, sum up everything you've said beautifully.
From the student experience, why is it important to have those conversations for you, for your fellow students, maybe even in our schools? Why is that important?
Yeah, I feel like it's important for us to be seen, to be heard, to be given the chance to speak on our identity, what we feel, to feel like we're not seen as like an option, but as we're here. We have always been here, and now we're just wanting to push that narrative that we're here to stay and we don't want to be silenced any longer. And having those simple conversations, even if it's just a little startup conversation or going deeper into your identity or how you feel about yourself or how you choose to present yourself, etc., is really a like opening space for students to feel welcome, safe, a safe space where you can feel, where you can't feel like that negative connotation towards you, or also just be yourself, be 100% you, authentically you. Those conversations open doors for students to feel like they belong, to create a new family, to reassure themselves that we are loved, we're here, and we want to spark something that's super beautiful within the community.
Would you say that by feeling belong, that you do better in school?
Of course. Like in any situation, if I felt like I wasn't welcome there, I would feel uncomfortable and necessarily would want to leave, but that also pushes me to want to be there, to want to be that change. But in my case, in Denver East High School, I have the opportunity to work with faculty, students who all identify, look like me, and just understand me, whether that's from my gay perspective or being part of the community. I feel welcomed, beloved. And when I think of East, I just don't think of it as a school. I think of it as a second home, my family, a place where I can indulge within different experiences, within staff, faculty who understands me, look like me. And it's beautiful to feel belonging in a place where most students don't necessarily feel or want to be belonged in.
What a compliment for East High School and our schools in general, right? If our students feel that they belong, inherently they're going to do better in school, and which is the end goal for us, right? We're coming up on graduation here shortly, and I think it's important, and we talk about this subject, the whole child, right? It's not just focusing on the academics portion, but on everything. And so if you create a very welcoming environment, the students inherently are going to do better in school.
Right. And I think too, when I'm thinking about children too, I'm also thinking about our youngest learners, and people say, well, should we be talking about this like in elementary school or kindergarten? And I think that the conversation in elementary school and kindergarten is there are different kinds of people, right? And creating that mindset from the beginning helps our students grow into a space of allyship and belonging, you know, whether it's LGBTQ plus allyship or allyship to our Black communities or our Latinx communities. And so I think even when we talk about talking about this stuff in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, you know, we're not having the same conversations that we would have in a high school, right? But we're talking about all people, right? We're talking about different kinds of families. And then we're talking also about, I think at that level, gender and gender stereotypes, right? And so gender stereotypes don't just impact LGBTQ plus students, they impact all students. And really a lot of that learning really comes, you know, in kindergarten through fifth grade, right? It really happens in elementary school when we learn what it means to be a boy or what it means to be a girl. And I think that it's great, right? If you're the most boyiest boy there is or the most girliest girl there is, those are great things, right? But it's important that we expand that conversation and let everyone know that it's okay to be who they are, and that we should care for and accept others as they are, right? And I think that's some of the most powerful work that we can do.
And it all begins with having conversations.
Right.
And so my next question, go along with that, is how do we start those conversations? What are some ways you recommend that we can start talking about these topics?
Yeah, I think that, you know, a really great way to talk about these topics is to kind of blend them in with the things that folks are already talking about, right? So like our kindergarten social studies standard, right, is who's in my community and who's in my family, right? And so talking to students about different kinds of families, right? And then thinking about also, just to go back to gender stereotypes, like, you know, I think in, you know, especially like kindergarten through third grade, we hear a lot of that gender stereotype, like boys don't wear pink socks or girls can't do this, right? And those are really important conversations to open up the space for everyone to be who they are. And so I think that's another thing you can do is talk about how things are for everybody, or everyone can wear anything, right? And then just as you're thinking about, especially with the younger grades, the curriculum and books that you're reading, you know, there's ways that you can talk about sexual and gender diversity that don't have anything to do with, you know, bodies, what bodies look like, or what you know, consenting adults do.
Sure.
It's really just talking about being yourself. So a great example that I love, there's a really wonderful children's book called Julian is a Mermaid, and it's about, do you know this book?
Ish.
Ish. I mean, I think it came out after you were younger, but you know, it's about a little boy who loves mermaids and he wants to be a mermaid, right? And it's not about sexuality. It's not even really about whether or not Julian is trans. It's really just about this boy who likes mermaids, right? Sure. And it's a really interesting lesson to observe because we talk about like, well, what if it was called Julie was a mermaid, right? Nobody cares. Right, but when it's called Julian is a mermaid and it's a boy, there's a conversation there that has like a little bit of a rub to it. And it's really interesting to talk to teachers about, well, why? Why does it matter, you know, that he's a boy who loves mermaids, right? And then talking to students, kind of that feeds into the lesson for students, which is, what do we think we would do if we had a boy who wanted to pretend to be a mermaid in our class, right? And then it's talking about gender stereotypes and what is for whom and why.
Right.
And I think those things are really exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Eric, for you, part two of this question, I want to ask, how can students have these type of conversations with their families, but also how does culture play into that conversation? Because we have to take that into account.
Of course, from like my personal experience, it's still not at that 100% point where I can have those full-on conversations with my family, because culture does have to do a big part with it, especially with even like the machismo side of my family of not diving into those emotions, or even taking it a step further, not diving into your own emotions and how you feel, how you identify is the big no-no in the community.
Yeah.
And for me, that plays like a major role in with who I start conversations with. So when I go talk to teachers or educators or people such as Levi, who get me, understand me, are open to those conversations, I feel belonged.
Yes.
But then in certain circumstances, I feel like I need to choose who to open up to and how to start those conversations and how do I navigate that? What do I say starting the conversation? And I feel like in order to start that conversation, you have to feel comfortable. Because if I felt 100% comfortable talking about this or these subjects with my parents, the conversation would have sparked and happened already.
Right.
But being uncomfortable with that has also pushed me back. Like, I don't know where to start with this. I don't know where this can go. Is this going to be some problem later? Machismo plays like a huge part of it, or like, will this be accepted? Will I be accepted? Or even like religion playing into it. Like, I can't play into that because, oh no, like Eric, you can't talk about that. You can't be the certain way because you're going to hell. So within those certain conversations that I hear from my own family, it kind of blocks off what I can and can't talk about and makes it more difficult for me to have those open conversations with everyone else.
Well, thank you for sharing, because I think it's a unique perspective, right? Because we talk about how our schools and these conversations are impacting our students, but then we forget to talk about the culture. We forget to talk about what has been ingrained in you since day one. And so why those conversations are a little more difficult to have with people who, you know, haven't had that space to talk about it and be in there. And so it's very unique, and I appreciate you sharing your experience. Eric, my next question, this one's directly for you. What kinds of LGBTQ plus information have you learned in school, and what do you wish you had learned a lot sooner?
Of course, like as I said before, I'm very grateful to go to East High School. Obviously isn't perfect, but what we do indulge in is our community, our diversity. And I'm currently enrolled in a queer literature class, which I'm very fortunate to, one of the inaugural classes within the state of Colorado, and or even within our own district. It's exciting to even say I'm in queer literature. I'm learning about queer history. I'm learning about queer Mesoamerican gods with Aztecs and Mayans that I would have never learned before. I'm learning about queer people of color of every background, dating all the way back from AD, BC, and just having that portion of history. But schoolwork aside, I've also learned about like LGBTQ health, LGBTQ sexual health resources, and having Denver Health come in to talk to us about PrEP or the resources that LGBTQ folks aren't necessarily given to. Because when we talk about sexual education, and we're always pushed back and left out of the scene. So I also wanted to mention that I am the QSA President, Queer Student Alliance of East High School. So I also feel like it's my opportunity and like almost role to bring those resources and to bring that sense of community and belonging and part of history wherever I go. So I've learned so much from myself, others, and even my own faculty. Shout out to Mr. Wiggins if he's watching. But like even just having those teachers that connect with you, that see you, that you can learn from as well is amazing. And as far as what I wish I would have learned before, it's kind of hard for me to answer because I've already had so much history engraved in me from my past schools, from even high school alone, that I have had like so much information already built up. So everything that I know now is a little bit of a fraction or something that built off from what I already knew.
And that's a unique thing to talk about, because when I was going to school at DPS, I don't remember us having a lot of those conversations. In fact, when I was a student at DPS, I can say we definitely didn't have those type of conversations. So I think it's really interesting and really exciting that, you know, I assume it's your work that is what's leading to
some of it.
Yeah.
And I want to also just give a shout out. A lot of people have been doing this work in DPS for a long time.
It's not just one person?
Not in my opinion, no. No, I just want to make sure, you know, collectively there's been a lot of pre-work done to get to this role. And this role is 3 years old, and I haven't made it all appear in 3 years. It's just kind of like pulling it together.
And so where would you like to take this?
Where would I like to take this? That's a really big question.
Yeah, that's a whole nother podcast.
That's a whole other podcast. I think generally where I see this role going is it kind of, in my mind, has two lanes, which is shifting mindsets for adults and creating spaces of belonging and voice for students. So that's kind of where I want things to move.
And that leads me into my next question, which is, what are some of the issues impacting our LGBTQ plus individuals in our society,
Sure.
and more specifically in our schools?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're watching any type of national news, you see the amount of anti-LGBTQ plus legislation that is moving across our nation in the last couple of years. Today, the day that we're filming this, is it's May the 10th. And I believe from January until now, there have been over 450 anti-LGBTQ plus pieces of legislation introduced all across the country. Just, I believe, 2 here in the state of Colorado, but within the city of Denver, maybe. But I think that, you know, our students hear those things, right? And so what we are seeing now are questions about the validity of LGBTQ plus people. Do we have the right to talk about LGBTQ plus topics in our schools? Can people access healthcare, right? And so with that, you know, we also see kind of an increase in general hate speech and general hate rhetoric, harassment of LGBTQ plus people. And I think all of those things are impacting us really negatively. And then I think if you think about the intersectional identities of LGBTQ plus folks in our communities, right? So whether that's race, ethnicity, language, disability or ability, all of those things, you know, layer and impact individuals, right? And I think in our schools, the state of Colorado and DPS have really strong policies, LGBTQ plus policies. And so I think that in terms of policies, I think we're pretty far ahead. But I think in our schools, it's how are those policies enacted, right? And what are the mindsets of educators within the schools to be able to support? I think that speaks to a lot of the work that my team does generally, the culture, equity, and leadership team. So how are we undoing bias in our schools, right? How are we dismantling systems of inequity? And what does that look like in our schools? And I think curriculum is something we can work on, right? And in January of 2020, our board passed the all-gender restroom mandate, which is great. It says that every school needs to have at least one single-stall all-gender restroom. But actually implementing that has actually been quite a bit of a challenge, right? There are kind of some plumbing and code issues, but
And
there's
some
also
of our buildings are historic buildings. And
right,
so,
and we can't just build a restroom, right? It's
Right.
very expensive. And along with that, what I've seen in many high schools, I don't know about East, is that the all-gender restrooms are locked. And so that is creating a huge barrier for our LGBTQ plus students to be able to access those restrooms. And I think that's something we need to address. And so I think it's great that we have the policy in place, but how is the policy actually being implemented? And like for me in my work, that's why it's really important that I'm having really direct connections with students, right? Like I can sit in Emily Griffith and say this is what we should do, but what does it actually look like?
so you're boots on the ground.
That's what I believe, yeah. I believe in boots on the ground.
Absolutely. And you touched on this a little earlier about the policies and practices, but can you go into in depth, maybe give us an example of some of those policies and practices for our students?
Yeah, and so in DPS, LGBTQ plus students and all students have the right to be addressed by the name and pronoun that they want, right? Some people call them preferred pronouns. I don't call them that. They're pronouns, right? And so if you have a student in your class who, you know, wants to be called Jennifer and wants to use she, her pronouns, we do that, right? We do that, period. We don't require any type of legal documentation. We don't require parent permission.
Is that unique? Do other school districts in other states require that?
It depends on the state, but in general, I would say in the state of Colorado, it's not unique, but I will say that I think that we are one of the first districts to make a bold statement about it. I'm not totally sure this is correct, but I believe that we've been following this guidance since like 2013, right? So since way before this became a part of the national conversation. And folks who refuse to use that correct name and pronoun, right? If you make a mistake, that's okay. Just correct yourself and move on, that's cool. But if students are repeatedly misgendered or repeatedly have the wrong name used within DPS, that's considered harassment, and a student can file a discrimination complaint. And then within the state of Colorado, we have the public accommodations law, which includes transgender folks. So like in our schools, transgender students have the right to use the restroom of the gender that they consistently identify with at school. Period. And so that's another one of our policies. We also allow for teachers and administrators, if they want to, they can hang a pride flag, they can hang a trans pride flag or a trans inclusion sign. And so that's in line with our district's commitment to equity. And so
Now I wish you would have brought a flag.
oh, I probably have one in my backpack
Because I want to see
somewhere.
what the differences are, right? Because
Oh yeah.
like most folks, I think this is an educational piece, right? And that's why
Yeah.
we have both of you on the podcast, is to share some light and an educational space. And so I think that what an opportunity, right,
Yeah.
to learn that, because I just learned that there's a different flag.
Yeah.
Literally,
Yeah,
just-
there's several different flags. There's a lot of different flags. Yeah, there's a lot of different flags.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
is there anything you want to add?
Oh, it's just like adding on, like speaking on to like, I am very fortunate to go to a school where I see all these things happen, flags in every
You're
room. I
living
see
it, yeah.
living the ideal dream for an LGBTQ plus or just a member
Okay.
of the community.
10 years ago, we probably wouldn't be able to
And
say
it's
that
insane,
anywhere.
and-
Yeah.
And even like currently today, like even in some different districts or in different states, this is criminalized and not seen as normal. But I'm very fortunate to have like see those like safe space posters outside of doors or like flags around the school,
Yeah.
the different types of flags, and see all the different intersectionalities or everything represented within those flags or communities and teachers. And very fortunate to have like East is a very historic building, and we have 4 gender neutral restrooms that we have all access to, which is, I mean, a big milestone of our own.
Yeah.
To have that, have teachers that support us, have teachers that always make sure to include within their curriculum or lessons pronouns for students and make sure they're comfortable, or even if they do slip up, they always try again and are reassured that it's okay, it's a learning process, we're all learning, and we're just so fortunate to have that safe space where we can heal almost in a way from the outside world.
Yeah.
Shifting gears a little bit, let's talk about the documentary.
Okay.
I want to dive into this powerful documentary that you have recently produced. What is the name of it, and what's the idea behind it?
Yeah. So the name of the documentary, which is kind of new, we have decided to name it "Reclaiming the Narrative," a story about LGBTQ plus students. I produced this documentary in partnership with the organization A Queer Endeavor. They're a nationally recognized center for sexual and gender diversity learning for teachers and pre-service teachers, in their house in the University of Colorado at Boulder. Why did I want to create this documentary? A couple of reasons. So A Queer Endeavor about 10 years ago made a very similar documentary called Breaking the Silence. I've been working with A Queer Endeavor for many, many years, and so I was there the night they produced that older film, Breaking the Silence. And I've seen over the last 10 years the incredible impact that it's had on teachers, because it really centered student voices and student experiences. And in talking with them, you know, that film was 10 years old, and it still does and did a lot of good, but we've been talking a lot about, like, what would it mean to update this film? What, you know, what's changed? What's not changed in the last 10 years? And so this film is funded by Root Ed, and so when I had access to this additional funding to do a project that is a little bit outside of my job or something creative or a little bit out of the box, I knew that this is what I wanted to do. And I think that I really wanted to create it because it's just really important for me to center student voices. And I think I do an LGBTQ plus kind of 101 professional learning here in our district, and you know, I think it's pretty good. But I was ready to do a 2.0, and I had been thinking about how I wanted to do a 2.0. But for me, you know, I can pull documents from wherever, you know, I can create activities from wherever. But to really center student voice, I think, is the most powerful thing for change. And that's why I wanted to do it. And in Queer Endeavor, you know, like I said, they're a nationally recognized organization, and so their ability to be able to kind of look at this data, right, all the footage that we filmed, and be able to pull out the themes and help create a script, you know, it's a great opportunity to work with a really high-level organization
Absolutely.
to create something unique. And I think it's pretty unique.
And now, Eric, I take it you're in the documentary,
Yes,
is that right?
I am.
Can you tell me a little bit about it without teasing too much?
Of course, I got the word and super excited to be a part of this like revolutionary documentary. From what I know, it was like I was going to be with a bunch of students, and we were all going to talk about experiences and just like a little tease, just having that. But when I first got there, it was like this insanely overwhelming, like in a good way, overwhelmingly positive intersexual space where students from different districts, different schools, different everything were all huddled in one place, just sharing and pouring out their feelings about their own experiences, their journeys, their life, their school experiences within DPS. And it really opened my perspective to a whole new like world. From before I was in the film, I was in a bubble. And now after the film, that bubble has burst, and exploring everything, getting resources and just voices from everywhere has really been one of the highlights of the film.
What an experience. How do you think that, or how do you hope that impacts Denver Public Schools?
I hope that it gives teachers the insight up to what students feel, up to what we experience on a daily basis, onto what type of things we see, how we feel, how we're represented within curriculum, within ourselves, or even with the simple usage of our pronouns, and really give them an insight of we're here. We are a part of the student body, and we're not silent voices. We are the minority, but we make the majority of these school places. And I really want teachers, or especially teachers who even identify with us, to feel empowered, to take that next step into what can I do to make my students feel secure, safe, or even a step further than that? How can I support more my students who have already had that sense of acceptance or belonging into a space where they've already feel accepted?
Because it's continued support. It just doesn't.
Exactly.
It's just like, all right, I did my piece. They should feel supported. It's about continuing that support.
and building on from that.
Wow, wow, that's an amazing message. I'm looking forward to seeing this documentary, but my question here is, where can we see it?
Yeah, so this is a professional learning documentary, and so the way that you'll be able to see it is to book professional development through the Culture, Equity, and Leadership team. The professional development that goes along with the film will be ready to roll in the fall of 2023, and so that's when I'll start doing that. And then if you are, for some reason, watching this and you're not a DPS employee, a Queer Endeavor will be able to give a similar professional learning all around the state or all around the country, and so you can also book them. It's possible that we'll do some additional just kind of screenings, but I'm not totally sure yet.
Oh, I look forward to that if you do have a screening. I love a good documentary, popcorn, Coca-Cola.
There is going to be popcorn.
Yes,
yeah.
I must.
I'm going to provide it.
Yeah.
Who doesn't love popcorn?
I mean, but I need like some Milk Duds or something to go with.
There you go. My last and final question for both of you is this. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you'd like to mention, that you'd like to maybe have a final message about?
What I would say right now in terms of LGBTQ plus folks is we need allies.
Okay.
We need folks that are willing to stand with us, right? A lot of what we see in kind of this anti-LGBTQ plus rhetoric, it hasn't hit DPS super hard, a little bit hard, but we should be advocating. And a part of a Queer Endeavor, one of the folks who works on that, her name is Dr. Bethy Leonardi, and she says, it's time for us to play offense. And I think about that, kind of with kind of this anti-critical race theory stuff that's happening, the anti-LGBTQ plus stuff that's happening. It feels like we're playing defense, right? We need to play offense. We're here, we're not going anywhere, we've always existed, and we're gonna continue to be bold.
Right.
And I hope that folks in the district continue to be bold with us.
And support that message.
Yeah.
And for you, Eric, anything else that you'd like to add?
Just adding on to Levi, like beautifully said, that we need people to stand with us, especially students, faculty a major part. If we can get an entire student body, but also our faculty to see us, represent us, and be the shouting voice with us, is powerful enough to not only let the other districts in Colorado know, but districts all over the nation know that we're here. We are not here to be silenced, but we are here to finally speak up and be that voice for marginalized communities, different intersectionalities, or just us in general, because we deserve to be heard. We're here, we're queer, we're not going anywhere.
That's
and it's finally time to, as my English queer lit teacher likes to say, gay it forward for the next generation and be that change, be that power, and be that person that the next little queer kid or educator or anyone looking at you says, there is hope.
Yes.
We got this.
Thank you for sharing, and thank you for joining us on this podcast. I want to give both of you a huge thank you because these conversations, these topics, not only are educational, but they are helping create those conversations at home or in the workplace. This concludes our Educa DPS podcast for today. Please help us share this content with families, friends, and other community members. For more Educa content and other stories, please visit and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Denver Public Schools Plus. Also, remember that we are on all of your favorite streaming platforms. Anywhere you listen to your podcast, you can find us at Denver Public Schools Podcast. It is important to give credit to the people behind the scenes who contribute to making this and all of our DPS multimedia productions, starting with our Executive Director of Communications for Denver Public Schools, Will Jones, our Director of External Communications, Scott Pribble, Selena Nakamura, Director of Internal Communications, Don Pierce, Executive Producer and Videographer of this podcast and all of our multimedia productions, Beto Gaitan, our multimedia lead producer and host of the Spanish Educa podcast, Hannah Young, our guru of social media, Georgia Alexander, Bond and Mill Levy Communication Specialist, Trey Hill, Strategic Communication Specialist, April Spites, our graphic designer for the podcast logo and all of DPS's productions. A special shout out to our DPS educators, students, and parents. A big thank you to our proud Superintendent, Dr. Alex Marrero, for supporting our Educa and all of our platforms. Yours truly, Javier Ibarra, Senior Manager of Media and Public Relations, as well as the Educa host in English. Please remember to tell your children more often, and I'm going to have our guests help me with this. I believe in you, and I know you can do it. Until next time.